The line in the water. David Carter never imagined that his greatest joy in life would come from something as quiet as casting a line into still water before sunrise. After 2 decades in the tech world, coding late into the night, pitching startups to rooms full of indifferent investors, he traded fast money for slow mornings. Willow Ridge was supposed to be his reward. The neighborhood was the kind of place real estate brochures romanticized. Manicured lawns, cul-de-sacs named after birds, and a private lake shimmering like a promise in the center of it all. The homes, stately and sterile in their perfection, circled the water like sentinels. David's house was modest by comparison, a 2-story brick colonial with wide windows and a wooden deck that faced the lake. He liked that deck more than the house itself. It was where he drank his first cup of coffee, barefoot, every morning. It was where he cast his line, not to catch anything in particular, but just to be part of the rhythm of the water. It was peaceful. That was the word he kept using when friends asked how retirement felt. Peaceful, simple, quiet. Sonny, his golden retriever, would curl at his feet on the deck, nose twitching at lake breezes. Most mornings were like this, the world asleep, mist on the water, bird song in the reeds. David would cast out, sip his coffee, and think about nothing. After years of needing to prove himself, to pitch and build and break into spaces where he never quite looked the part, the silence felt earned. That morning was no different, until he checked the mail. Among the coupons and flyers was a white envelope, thick and stiff. The HOA's logo, a stylized heron in front of a pine tree, was stamped in gold foil. David opened it casually, expecting more neighborhood announcements. Notice of violation. Unauthorized use of lake property. He blinked. A $75 fine, citing non-compliance with community usage protocols and unsanctioned recreational activity. David chuckled. For fishing, he asked Sonny, who wagged her tail in confusion. He turned the letter over, half expecting it to be a prank. But there it was, a full-page explanation with bullet points, bylaws quoted in dry legalese, and a warning that further violations could result in legal action. He didn't know whether to laugh or be annoyed. Later that day, he mentioned it to Linda, his neighbor 2 doors down. She was watering her garden, wide-brimmed hat hiding most of her silver hair. "They find you for fishing?" she asked, genuinely surprised. "Honey, kids have been fishing in that lake for years." The Thompsons twins practically live on their kayak. "Yeah," David said, watching a teenager across the street skateboard down the sidewalk with AirPods in. "I've seen them. No fine for them, I guess." Linda hesitated, then shook her head. "You're not wrong to wonder." That pause told him everything. David hadn't thought much about the neighborhood's demographics when he moved in. Willow Ridge was quiet, clean, and close enough to the city without feeling like it. But now that he thought about it, he'd only seen a handful of other black residents, and most of them weren't residents at all. They were delivery drivers, landscapers, or cleaning staff. He remembered his first week here. A woman jogging past his driveway had smiled tightly and asked, "Are you new? Or do you work for the previous owner?" She'd apologized when he corrected her, but the tone lingered. David tried not to read too much into things. He had money, manners, and a mortgage like everyone else. But in Willow Ridge, there were unspoken lines, and it seemed he'd just crossed one. A few days later, he passed the lake again, this time walking Sonny, and saw a group of boys fishing from the far dock. All white. No adult supervision. No badges or permits in sight. He wondered if they ever got letters in gold foil envelopes. He began noticing other things, too. A backyard fire pit with smoke curling into the air against HOA rules. A boat tethered to the lake's edge. A homemade treehouse in plain view. The rules, it seemed, were flexible depending on who you were or weren't. That night, David sat on his deck, rod untouched, and watched the lake shimmer under the moonlight. What had been a place of peace now felt conditional. Temporary. He reread the violation notice and underlined one line. Rules exist to ensure uniformity and order within the community. Uniformity. He looked around at the rows of matching mailboxes, the trimmed hedges, the identical smiles from neighbors who never asked his name. Maybe it was just a fishing fine. Or maybe David thought it was something else, something deeper moving just beneath the surface. Ripples beneath the surface. David decided to comply, at least on paper. For the next few mornings, he sat on his deck with a mug of dark roast and Sunny by his feet, the fishing pole left inside. The lake looked different now. Still calm, still beautiful, but it didn't feel his anymore. He wasn't sure it ever had. It bothered him more than he expected. Not just the fine, not even the accusation. What unsettled him most was the quiet certainty with which they assumed they could tell him no. Not explain, not warn, just penalize and expect obedience. He started doing what he'd always done when something didn't sit right. He read. That afternoon, he combed through the HOA handbook, tucked away in a kitchen drawer since move-in day. 34 pages of rules and clauses. Grass must not exceed 2.5 inches. Exterior paint colors must fall within the approved natural tones. Holiday decorations allowed no earlier than November 15th. And buried on page 27, use of the lake and surrounding areas is restricted to HOA-sanctioned activities or use by residents possessing a valid access permit. David had never heard of such a permit. He'd certainly never been offered one. The next HOA meeting was 2 days away. He circled the date and decided he would attend. Not to argue, yet, but to observe. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a pale stucco building styled like a suburban Tuscan villa. Inside, it smelled like air freshener and stale coffee. Rows of neatly arranged folding chairs faced a raised table where the HOA board members sat like a panel of judges. David took a seat in the back, notebook in hand. At the center of the board sat Bradley Weston, the HOA president. Clean-shaven, square-jawed, and perpetually dressed like he was headed to court, which made sense since he was a real estate lawyer by profession. His voice was smooth, firm, and dismissive in the way only practiced authority can be. Next order of business, Bradley said, is the reminder about lake usage. We've had several complaints about unregulated fishing. David raised an eyebrow. He was fairly certain he was the several complaints. Bradley continued. As always, permits must be requested through the proper channels. The rules apply to everyone. David's hand went up. I'd like to request one. A permit. Bradley looked over his reading glasses. Your name? David Carter. Willow Court, Lot 8. Bradley gave a thin smile. Mr. Carter, your fine was processed last week, correct? That's right. I paid it. Well then, Bradley said, as if the matter were resolved. Perhaps we can consider your request at a later date. These things take time and review. David nodded slowly. How do I apply? Email the board. There's a form. I didn't see any form on the HOA website. Bradley paused. We've been updating the website. I can have someone send it to you. Later, one of the board members, a woman named Janet, pulled David aside with a forced smile. Just so you know, the permits are mostly ceremonial. We don't really hand them out unless there's a specific reason. David stared at her. Fishing is a specific reason. She chuckled like he'd made a joke. I mean a community event. A kid's fishing derby or something. So the rules are real, but the permits aren't? He asked, deadpan. She blinked. It's more about maintaining standards. We like to keep things uniform. There was that word again. Uniform. The next morning, David took a walk through Willow Ridge, noting things he hadn't paid attention to before. A pickup truck in someone's driveway had political bumper stickers that would have earned him a visit from the compliance committee if it had been his. Another home had a flagpole with 3 flags, American, college team, and one that wasn't HOA approved by any standard. Then there was the new family on Maple Loop, a young interracial couple who had moved in 2 months ago. He introduced himself as they were unloading groceries. HOA give you the welcome packet? David asked. The man laughed. They gave us a fine for our mailbox being 2 inches taller than standard. That's new, David said. They also reminded us 3 times not to leave bikes on the front porch. They say that to everyone. Funny thing, the woman replied. Our white neighbor leave hers out all the time. Nothing said. David nodded. Yeah, that tracks. That evening, David sat back on his deck with Sunny, watching the golden hour melt across the lake. He didn't fish. Not yet. Instead, he scrolled through public property records on his tablet. The lake, he discovered, was not HOA-owned. It was part of a larger parcel still listed under an LLC called Blue Way Holdings, a development shell that hadn't updated its registry in over a decade. The taxes on it were paid, but barely. The HOA acted like they owned the water. But legally, they didn't. David grinned. Not broadly, just enough to acknowledge the ripple of an idea forming. They wanted to play games with rules? He could play too, and he played to win. Hook, line, and deed. It started with a Google search. David typed in the name of the holding company that technically owned the lake, Blue Way Holdings, LLC. It sounded official, something conjured up in a boardroom with a mahogany table. But what he found was underwhelming. A single-page filing with the county registrar, no active website, and an out-of-state mailing address tied to a developer who'd long since gone bankrupt. The deeper he dug, the more the facts unraveled. Blue Way Holdings hadn't maintained any physical presence in the area for over a decade. The lake, along with a narrow strip of land bordering it, had been quietly passed through various shell companies, likely for liability protection. And currently, it was technically unmanaged, floating in legal limbo. The HOA had always assumed control, but they'd never bought it. They just printed signs and called it theirs. David leaned back in his chair, staring out the window at the calm, silver-blue water. Sonny rested nearby, tail thumping lazily. This might actually work, he whispered. 3 weeks later, it did. After consulting with a real estate attorney, privately, through a third party, David filed paperwork under the name Stillwater Ventures, LLC. It cost him a fraction of what he expected. The property was never listed for public sale. It simply hadn't been renewed. A quiet acquisition, clean and legal. By the time the deed was transferred to his LLC, the lake was his. He stood on the shoreline the next morning, coffee in hand, feeling the weight of ownership settle over him like a second skin. Nothing about the lake looked different, still reflecting sky and clouds in equal measure, but to David, it felt newly alive. Not out of revenge, not yet, but from the satisfaction of reclaiming something he'd been denied. He posted signs first. Private property. No trespassing without owner consent. Violators will be prosecuted under local and civil codes. At first, the neighborhood ignored them. Then came the enforcement. On a sunny Saturday afternoon, Bradley Weston's teenage son zipped across the lake on a paddleboard, trailed by two friends laughing loudly. David stood by the waterline, phone in hand. He wasn't angry. He was thorough. The photos he took were time-stamped and geolocated. He sent them, along with a cease and desist, to the HOA board that evening. The letter included a digital copy of the deed and a demand to update all neighborhood maps and official documentation regarding lake access. The HOA's response came fast and furious. Emails, phone calls, an official letter, this time with actual legal formatting, requesting an emergency meeting to resolve a community misunderstanding. David declined. Instead, he had motion sensor sprinklers installed around the lake's most popular access points. When two kids tried to fish early one morning, the sprinklers went off, followed by a friendly but firm audio recording. This property is privately owned. Please exit the premises immediately. By the end of the week, a police cruiser drove by after a neighbor complained. David walked out with a binder full of paperwork and handed it to the officer without a word. The officer left 5 minutes later, shaking his head. At the next HOA meeting, David showed up early and sat front row. Bradley, looking a few shades paler than usual, called the meeting to order. "We'd like to discuss the recent lake activity," he began, shuffling papers. "It seems there's been some confusion regarding property rights." "No confusion," David said evenly. "The lake is mine." Bradley tried to recover. "Technically, perhaps, but the spirit of this community has always been guided by rules. That's what you told me." A murmur went through the audience. "I followed your process," David continued. "I asked for a permit. I paid my fine. I waited for approval. You said the rules apply to everyone." He leaned back. "Now they do." Another board member, a soft-spoken woman named Cheryl, cleared her throat. "Could we work something out? Maybe a limited access schedule? Community use?" David looked at her, not unkindly. "Maybe, if the community learns what access actually means." Whispers filled the neighborhood over the next few days. Kids complained they couldn't swim or fish. Parents demanded explanations. A handful of residents emailed David directly, tried to be diplomatic. One even offered to buy the lake from him at a reasonable return. He ignored them. Instead, he built a small dock on his side, invited a few people he actually liked: Linda, the new couple on Maple Loop, the quiet family at the end of Willow Court, for a quiet evening of fishing. He handed out guest passes. They laughed, grilled hot dogs, and watched the sunset ripple across the water. Meanwhile, the rest of the community stood behind fences, peering over with a mix of curiosity and resentment. David didn't gloat. That wasn't his style. He was just fishing the way he used to, but this time on his own terms. The gated circle. Weeks passed. The air grew warmer, the lake brighter with each sunrise, and with it came a shift, not just in the water, but in Willow Ridge itself. David Carter's quiet rebellion had settled over the neighborhood like fog. Soft, hard to pin down, and everywhere at once. The signs remained. So did the motion-activated sprinklers and boundary lights. The message was clear now. Access was a privilege, not an assumption. Most neighbors still steered clear of David. Some grumbled at HOA meetings. A few passive-aggressively waved from their porches, unsure if they should be angry or embarrassed. But others, a surprising number, approached differently. Linda came by one afternoon with a fresh rhubarb pie and a simple compliment. "You got them good," she said, setting the dish down on his kitchen counter. Lord knows it was overdue. The biracial couple on Maple Loop, Jordan and Elena, stopped by with their toddler and asked if they could visit the lake sometime. David welcomed them without hesitation. He created a new system, informal but structured. Lake access was granted through community sessions he held on his deck every other Saturday. They weren't lectures, more like small group chats with coffee and chairs and uncomfortable truths. Topics ranged from housing policy to microaggressions. Most came out of curiosity. Some came defensively. Almost all left quiet. The idea wasn't to punish the neighborhood. It was to wake it up. One evening, after a small session, David found himself walking the shoreline with Jordan. The younger man glanced at the water, hands in his pockets. "You ever think about just moving away?" he asked. "Like, start fresh somewhere else?" David chuckled. "I used to. Every time something like this happened in the past, I'd tell myself, maybe next time I'll pick better. But this time," he paused, letting the breeze carry his words forward. "This time, I didn't want to run. I wanted them to sit with what they'd built, to see how it felt when the rules didn't protect them." Jordan nodded. "You flipped the whole neighborhood with a fishing rod and a deed." "No," David said. "I flipped it with their own logic." The HOA board couldn't hold the tension much longer. At the next quarterly meeting, Bradley Weston looked tired. His voice, once confident and clipped, now wavered beneath the weight of community frustration. Multiple households had filed formal grievances, not against David, but against the HOA itself. Selective enforcement, transparency concerns, abuse of authority. A petition circulated to recall board members. It reached the threshold within days. Bradley stepped down quietly. So did Janet. Cheryl stayed, though her tone had softened since the lake acquisition. She emailed David personally and thanked him. Not sarcastically, not with hidden barbs, just plainly. "I didn't see it before," she wrote. "Now I do." A new board was elected. More diverse. Younger. Less obsessed with mulch color and mailbox height. David was offered a seat unanimously. He declined. "I'm not here to govern anyone," he said. "I just wanted to cast a line without being cast out." Instead, he nominated Jordan, who accepted with a speech about fairness, equity, and responsibility. Things didn't magically become perfect. Some neighbors still avoided eye contact. A few sold their homes and left. Others tried to claw back normalcy through rumor and denial. But something in Willow Ridge had undeniably changed. One warm spring afternoon, David sat on his dock again, barefoot, fishing pole in hand, Sunny curled beside him. A young boy, Jordan and Elena's son, toddled down the slope with a plastic rod and asked if he could fish too. David smiled. "Of course. Let me show you how to cast." The boys' line splashed clumsily into the shallows. No fish bit, but it didn't matter. Across the lake, someone new was moving into the Weston house. The truck had no political bumper stickers. The new owners waved genuinely. David waved back. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, he walked the path that bordered the lake. He paused at the sign he'd posted weeks ago and pulled it out of the ground. In its place, he planted a new one. Stillwater Lake. Welcome with permission. Respect the water. Respect each other. It was less a rule and more a reminder. He stood quietly, breathing in the dusk. The same man who'd once sat on this deck, fine for fishing, now on the water. But more than that, he had claimed his place in the world. Not with force, not with rage, but with resolve. As he walked back to the house, Sonny bounding ahead, he thought. They had tried to fence him out, so he gave them a taste of their own gate. Not out of vengeance, but clarity. In Willow Ridge, where sameness had once ruled, David had become the ripple that remade the shore.